Hey everyone, welcome to Module 4, Population, Development, and Food Production. In this short lecture, we're going to be talking about Malthusian theory as it relates to food, and we'll briefly talk about anti-Malthusian theories related to inequality, the demographic transition in demographics, and the powerful role that women play in development and population. So this may be a review for some of you, but Malthusian theory was developed by Thomas Malthus in an essay that he wrote called The Principles of Population in 1798. In this essay, he wrote that the power of the population is so superior to the power of the earth to produce subsistence for man that premature death must, in some shape or other, visit the human race. So in this, it was the notion that the population was growing faster than the food supply. And he argued that unless checked in some way, population growth would continue until it ran up against environmental limits, causing poverty, hunger, misery, resource scarcity, and eventually a population crash. So some argue that the essay is in many ways racist and places the bulk of environmental and health problems on poor countries with the highest populations, namely the global south, which is really an unfair assertion given that developed countries play a role in how lesser developed countries are developed. And it's worth noting that the rate of population growth is declining slightly, with the population peak happening in the mid-1960s. But population growth still continues because of what is known as compounding growth. And here you can see what this growth looks like and what the models predict. So for example, in 2050, it's estimated around 9.6 billion people will share this earth. Some projections are higher and some are lower, but this is one model that we've seen. Now, there are a lot of critiques to the Malthusian theory, and one is the inequality critique. So many argue that the direction of causality should be reversed. Here we can see this is generally a sketch of what the Malthusian theory looks like, with population growth leading to environmental decline, and then environmental decline leading to poverty and hunger. However, there are a lot of people who argue that the causality should be reversed, that in fact, poverty and hunger in lesser developed countries leads to environmental decline and population growth. So this is a thought that through international development and a history of inequality leads to the latter of these two kind of like causal models. So this is that as the poor struggle to gain a living, there is this notion that children, for example, are needed for economic growth and labor. Now, here in this slide, we have food for all. So thinking about Malthusian theory as it directly relates to food and malnutrition, famines, and hunger. So Malthusians would argue that malnutrition, for example, is an indicator of population pressures on the land. However, anti-Malthusians suggest that the problem is not the amount of food, but access to food and overconsumption by some, and that there's also an argument that greater population density is not correlated with poverty. So there is a power structure perspective on food and population, and this suggests that countries with power have a greater ability to gain food and control the food chain and food supply systems and get the food that they need, but that poorer populations have little control, fewer options, and regard children as an economic resource. A theorist within the anti-Malthusian kind of like camp is Francis Lappe. And Francis Lappe argued that there's a little correlation between population density and the amount of food that can come from the land. And again, that poverty and environmental decline lead to population growth by decreasing the power of a people and the power that they have on their lives. And then economic security is really sought through larger families. Another prolific writer on food and hunger is Amartya Sen, who writes about famines and suggests that famines are caused by a lack of access to food, and thus famines happen when there's a breakdown in entitlements to food, not a lack of food itself. suggesting that famines are caused less by environmental limits, but more of a breakdown in kind of social political structures. And that the solution is really a redistribution of access to food, and that we need to increase entitlements to jobs and democracy, for example. Another critique on the Malthusian theory is the demographic critique. And here, I want to introduce you to the demographic transition. This was put forward in 1945 by Frank Notstein. And here we can see that it's argued that in the pre-industrial stage that we had high birth rates and death rates. But then in the transitional stage, when death rates declined due to increased food production and improved medical care, we saw that there was a decline in death rates, but that the birth rates remained high until the industrial stage that developed countries have gone through. And this is a birth rate decline due to increased opportunities for women and access to birth control. So coupling lower death rates and lower birth rates then in the post-industrial stage, birth rates and high death rates are low. So this suggests that as countries modernize and develop, there is an initial increase in birth rates, but eventually this leads to a stable population. And development could reduce population growth and disprove Malthus' prediction that population increase is uncontrollable and that it would eventually lead to poverty, hunger, and misery. So then, lastly, I want to highlight the key role of women in development. Many argue that women are really have a key role in the demographic transition in less developed nations, and that the improved status of women is viewed as the most significant means of reducing rapid population growth and improving the lives of children. So the status of women in indicators like education, health access, labor opportunities, or job opportunities is really the most consistent factor in fertility reduction. And then we know that women have a significant role in terms of development and population. However, how to control or if population should be controlled is actually a very controversial topic in terms of moral judgments about some forms of birth control and even the promotion of birth control being related to oppression and even racism. So we do know, though, that birth control can influence population trends when it's linked with social equity and social equity indicators. So it's not just simply about mandating some kind of birth control, and it's not a one solution situation in terms of population growth. It's a very complex issue. So we know that women have a key role in development and population, but it is anything but a simple phenomenon to try and think about and solve.